If you gathered a bunch of historians, religious or not, they would agree that there once walked a man named Jesus, a real guy. He lived in Galilee, was killed by Romans, and his followers carried on after his death. But 2,000 plus years later, those are the only facts they could all agree on. But for a person as consequential as Jesus, how do we fill in the rest? And what does that picture say about ourselves? So prepare yourself for some serious questions and some not so serious questions. Like, what would Jesus's coffee order be?
Jesus strikes me as a black coffee guy. Like me, he likes to suffer a little bit with it, where it's like, this isn't going to be easy, but we're doing it anyhow.
Gotcha. My name is Javi Zubizarreta, and welcome to Jesus's Favorite Podcast, a show where we explore the many ways we can understand one of the most important figures in history. There's a lot of talk of food and drink in Jesus' life in the Bible. He turns water to wine, breaks bread with the apostles, serves up a massive spread of fish and loaves. The man liked a good meal. So to talk more about how food and faith can feed us, I wanted to talk to a real expert. Kevin Gillespie is a world-renowned chef, first coming to national prominence on season 6 of the hit TV series Top Chef. He has several restaurants in the Atlanta area that have all earned him major accolades from diners and critics alike. Kevin Gillespie, thank you so much for joining us here at Jesus' Favorite Podcast. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor.
You are a renowned chef, a fan favorite on Top Chef. You've got restaurants. I'm curious, though, where did cooking begin for you? Where did the love for it start?
The love of cooking started very, very early for me, actually. So I grew up in a really large family. And when I say large, I mean that we were preparing breakfast, lunch, and dinner for about 30 people each day.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So I have a lot of siblings, but I also have a lot of cousins, and my family all lived on a single big piece of land. So all of my aunts and uncles, cousins, grandparents, everyone lived together. And my grandmother was the one who cooked for everyone. And she did this alone. And I just thought it was the most amazing thing. And I wanted to learn to help. But that's because in my young mind, I noticed that everyone listened to her and did what she asked them to do. And I thought, it must be because she's the one who cooks. It had nothing in my mind. It had nothing to do with the fact that she was the mother of all these people. But
sure.
And so I was like, well, if I learn how to cook, then I can be the boss. And so originally it started, I think, more than anything, because I wanted to control things. And then in time, I found that I really loved it. I loved eating food, obviously, but I loved being able to craft food. And I've always been a person who is very interested in history. And obviously the intersectionality of food when it comes to history, it's just a match made in heaven. And so when I was 7 years old, I told my parents that I wanted to be a chef. And I'm sure they were like, where did you even hear that word? This is long before, the modern TV, food TV. Right. But they were into it, and so they took me to the Culinary Institute of America on vacation that year. And
oh wow,
that was kind of it. And from that point forward, that's what I wanted to do.
That's incredible. Tell me about your grandma's cooking.
So I'm really lucky that I have a family who, to me, has an interesting culinary story. So my grandparents on both sides are from Scotland, but both sides, when they immigrated here, my mother's side, it comes from sort of southern Scotland and is a prominent family in that area. And so they came, and the food that my grandmother prepared was very continental. She traveled all over the world. My grandparents' home always had foods from different parts of the world, and she was very, very into it. My mother's father, who I lived next door to, comes from the Highlands, and their food is very rural. It's very impoverished, I guess you would say.
Sure.
And they immigrated to the Carolinas and became instantly woven into that Appalachian sort of world of food. And so I grew up with this hybrid of Southern and Scottish food kind of pushed together. And so I saw, really weirdly enough, from a childhood onward, a really broad brush of food. So everything from very classic Southern food all the way to whatever was the current kind of modern food of the late 80s and 90s that was happening in Paris, because my grandparents would go on vacation. And so it was weird to grow up with two very different families whose only bond that they shared was obviously the fact that their children were married to each other, but also that they had this shared Scottish heritage.
That's incredible. And your grandma as a chef in the kitchen, everyone's listening to her. What sort of chef was she?
Yeah, my granny, who's what I call my dad's mom, she was really just focused on feeding folks, but her food was delicious. And what really was the marquee of it is that my family grew the vast majority of the food that we had. And as a kid, I hated it because we all had to work the garden, except that our garden that we shared as a family was like almost the size of a football field. And so it's really a farm, not a garden.
Yeah, sure.
And it was a lot of work, but anything she was preparing was truly very in season. Now I realize as a chef, like how privileged I was to grow up with that. As a little kid, I was annoyed because my friends had Lunchables and stuff like that, and I thought they were really cool. And I was sort of embarrassed by the home cooking that I went to school with. But now I realize that was really fortunate.
Gosh, yeah. So as you grew into your life as a chef, and even today as a chef, what is it about cooking? What is it about food that feeds you, that pushes you forward?
So it's a couple of different things. I think there's one side of it is the artistic expression. My mother's family is riddled with artists, and they encouraged that from youth onward. If we showed a propensity for any form of visual art or music or writing, my grandparents and my aunts and uncles were very vocal about us pursuing that. And food became my best version. I also paint and I play music, but I was always better at food than I was at everything else. And so that's one piece. But the second, I think, comes from my father's side of the family, who were all very, very talented craftsmen. And I appreciated the intricacy and the practice and the years of refining a technique to make something a little bit better than it was before. And again, I feel very fortunate that I have both of those things naturally inside me. And so cooking appeals to both sides of my sort of temperament. And it also, I think, to me, will always be a symbol of communion with others, because that's what it was for me in my youth. It was all about the family being together.
On that note, you've spoken publicly about your Catholic faith. In the same way that food started early on, this passion for you, where did faith first start for you? Where did you first sort of come into an understanding about Jesus and faith?
My family are very dedicated followers, and from early childhood onward, like I don't have a memory of when I first started going to church, because it's all that I ever remember. That said, I think like a lot of young people, especially like a lot of teenagers, there was a definite chunk of time when it didn't make any sense to me. And when I wasn't sure whether I believed it or what I believed. I think at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure I would have claimed to have been agnostic, just simply that I have no idea. But it came back, and it came back in full force for me when something happened to me as a teenager. I got in a very, very bad car accident as a teenager that I should not have survived.
Oh, wow.
And in every way I shouldn't have. My car was completely destroyed. Everything that was inside my car was thrown from my car. I was not wearing my seatbelt. And I remember the accident happening. And then I remember nothing. And then I remember waking up, but I was standing on the side of the road looking at my car that was on fire, and I didn't have a scratch on me.
My word.
I just couldn't I was actually catatonic when the people showed up, the paramedics, everyone. I couldn't speak. And so I think they thought I had brain damage or something. And it was only after I got to the hospital that I kind of came out of it. And the first thing I did after I was released from the hospital, this was a Sunday morning that this accident happened on. And I went to mass that night, and it sounds cliche, but it hit me like a load of bricks. I think I had been pretty vocal about like, until I see something with my own eyes, and I needed confirmation in a very real way. And that was what it was for me. And that was the shifting point. But what it did is that it was a renewal of my faith, but it also changed my approach to my faith. It wasn't what it was before. I understood more deeply the significance of the words rather than just the going through the motions part of it. The ritualization was something I was always interested in, but now I felt like I understood the bigger meaning, and that had always eluded me, I think, until that point.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you're with us for many reasons.
And I feel like, I'm not a person who necessarily believes in this constant intervention in our lives. I don't know that it works that way.
Sure.
But I also don't believe that it never happens. And I feel like there have been moments in my life when maybe I needed that intervention, but it didn't come, or I wanted it, perhaps is the better way of saying it. And then other times when I truly needed it and it was always there for me. So,
yeah. Well, I think that it's a great way to start talking a little bit more about Jesus here. And to help us even more, I've got some rapid fire questions for you here. There's no right or wrong.
Okay.
All right. If Jesus had a favorite ice cream flavor, what would it be?
Oh, man. I feel like it would be like pistachio, something that's a flavor kind of that area.
All right. If Jesus had a favorite movie, what would it be?
I could see how he would see the significance of a movie like Saving Private Ryan and what the saving part actually meant.
Great. If Jesus had a favorite season, what would it be?
I feel like he's a summer guy, which is very much not me, but he seems like a summer guy.
Are you a winter guy?
I'm a winter guy, big time.
Fair enough. Would Jesus be a dog person, cat person, or plant person?
Got to be a dog person.
If Jesus came to your house, what would you offer him to drink?
I do actually have some wine at my home that is made in the Levant. So I might break that out and say, hey, I think this is a taste of home for you. Otherwise that maybe just a glass of water.
If Jesus had a favorite college sports team, what would it be?
Oh, man. I mean, I am a diehard University of Georgia fan, but I have to feel like he's pulling for Notre Dame. And so, how would he not be?
It's named for his mom. So.
Yeah, exactly.
What would Jesus's coffee order be?
Jesus strikes me as a black coffee guy, like just brewed black coffee. I don't want to make a fuss about it. Like, I'm not trying to put anybody out. I also think, like me, he likes to suffer a little bit with it, where it's like, this isn't going to be easy, but we're doing it anyhow.
Gotcha. All right. Would Jesus be an Apple or Android user?
Man, he'd probably be an Android guy. I feel like there's some like purity to Android, and just all of us that are in the Mac world, we can't admit to it. We're like so brainwashed that we can't admit that it's actually better.
Fair enough. And then final question in this round. In one word, who is Jesus to you?
In one word, Jesus is sanity for me. Yeah. I feel like this world that we live in makes no sense most of the time. And it's one of the only ways that I can make sense of it. Like, it's one of the only ways that I don't just find this whole experiment of ours to be just chaos, crazy chaos.
When you went to mass that day after your accident, what did you find there?
Yeah, I remember it very clearly. I cried a lot. It was like every word that was spoken in every reading and in the homily, they all felt weirdly applicable to that moment right then. I don't actually remember what the homily was. I don't remember what it was. I could probably go back and look and figure it out. But it felt like each word was very directed at me. And what I felt was akin to when your parents have told you something for a long time. Let's just use the example of like, hey, I know that you're friends with this person, but we're worried about they express this concern for you, and you get frustrated with that concern. And in time, you begin to think that your parents are out of touch, that they don't understand. And they're not yelling at you. They're not mad at you, but they just keep saying the same thing. And inevitably, they usually are right. And in time, you realize that. And there's that moment when you admit to the fact that they saw it from that they understood it and saw it from the beginning. And you recognize that they weren't trying to attack you. They were trying to remind you that they love you in a way that is hard for you to understand.
Sure.
I feel like I was having that conversation with my father in that moment, which was like, I know you're not mad at me. You just needed me to understand. And I couldn't understand. And I'm sorry that I couldn't appreciate how much you love me until now. Like, that's what it felt like.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for myself, one of my big moments of realization about what my faith as a Catholic was in college. I would celebrate Mass in this tiny little chapel where there'd be like 5 of us around the altar. And when it was just us, just a few people, it wasn't, all the people at church where you kind of get lost in it and you're looking around at this person and that person. You realize that ultimately this is a meal that we're celebrating. This is us at a dinner table, joining together over food. I'm curious how your faith, especially after a moment like that, and your career as a chef, where do you find those two aspects coming together?
Well, I think that they live like interwoven into each other at all times.
Yeah.
One of the things that I say so much about the work that I do is that I believe in its power. I think that preparing food for someone, especially for strangers, which is who I am cooking for most of the time, people I do not know.
Sure.
Sharing a part of me and the talent the grace that I have been given with them is, to me, I am doing what I am supposed to do. Like the verse in the Bible that has always resonated with me the most is in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10, maybe. We're each given grace, and what it is that we are given, we are meant to share, and we are meant to work in the service of others. And I take that in a lot of ways very literally. And I think that my work in the service of others, in feeding them, in providing hospitality and sharing myself, sharing in my restaurants, the seating is communal. People sit together who do not know each other. I feel like I was given this talent, and it is my responsibility to use it in the service of others. And so cooking food, serving food to people, sharing a meal to me is about as close as I can get to being connected to the Lord as anything I can possibly do. I don't know that there's something else I do in my life where I feel closer than that.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your restaurants are set up communally and philosophy behind that?
So this was driven in large part by a conversation I had with my father. My father has passed away last month, and
sorry to hear that.
I've been thinking a lot about what led me to build Gun Show, and one of the driving factors was that my father was always really nervous when he came into my previous restaurants. They're very, very fine dining.
Sure.
And he was a very blue collar person, and he felt like he stuck out. In his words, he wasn't who I wanted there. And it bothered me. And when I built the restaurant Gun Show, the name is funny, but it has a personal connection to him. But I built it to be communal. I built it where the prices of each dish were very clear, where we leave that on the table for you so you can see how much money you have spent while you are dining. Sure. It was all in an attempt to ensure that there was not a single person who would feel like we didn't build it for them. Because I got really concerned that my desire to share this gift with people was only being shared with a very elite class of people, and that I felt like that went against the whole point of it. Yeah. And I needed to do something to change that. And I knew that I could never change the quality of the food that I prepare. I knew it could never be cheap, but I knew that I could also build an environment where people would meet others who they, during dinner, where people would literally share food with one another as opposed to ordering their own plates of food, and where we would have a degree of transparency in what we are doing as a sign of humility, that we are not hiding away what we are doing and wearing fancy white chef coats. We don't see ourselves that way. And it has gone a long way, because I think that the quality of the food and drink that we prepare is on par with the finest restaurants in the world. And sure. We were just graded by Michelin, and I would say they agree with that.
Yeah.
But the way we do it is with a degree of humility that I believe had escaped me for a while until I was more mature in my career.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's got to be so hard to do as a chef. I mean, to make a living, to have a restaurant stay open. What an incredible thing to commit yourself to. Was your father able to visit this restaurant?
He has, yeah. He came a number of times. He actually prefers another one of my restaurants called Revival, because it's pretty much just his mother's recipes. And so gotcha. He likes it. It's a little bit more homey. It's also quieter. My dad my dad was worked in a machine shop his whole life. So my dad's hearing wasn't great. So gun show's kind of loud. And so he couldn't really hear. So he liked it, but he likes the others a little bit better. But he appreciated, I think, that I just was willing to put my money where my mouth is, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, that I do believe that it's important to be in the service of everyone, not some people.
Yeah.
And that was the best way I could think to do it.
I've read interviews of yours talking about this topic of inequality in the restaurant space, sort of the challenges of it. Beyond sort of how you've designed this restaurant, are there other ways you've tried to say, how do we make food accessible, fine dining accessible? How do we make sure that we're not just operating at this top level of experience?
Yeah, we've done it in a few different ways. I think the first is that we are an intentionally very diverse team. It's not an accident. We have intentionally hired people from a lot of different backgrounds. And I don't just mean people of different races. I really do mean people of every kind of background imaginable. And we're allowing these people in a very authentic way to represent themselves to our guests without us adulterating that or without toning it down. So that means that the food that we're serving is just as much inspired by what I like as what a cook of mine who is Korean likes. And I think that because guests come in and they can sort of reflect some degree of themselves, both in the way that my staff looks and in the way that our food is, I think they feel a little bit more comfortable, but they also feel a lot more included. And to me, that's what's important. We also are really active ensuring that the folks who work alongside us, that their voice is heard. And we take very seriously when someone brings to us, perhaps a concern with regards to a cultural issue that we're unaware of. I pride myself in the fact that we have tried to be very active rather than reactive in this area.
I've also heard you talk about food waste as a serious concern. How are you tackling that? I'm sure it's a major issue for a restaurant that's trying to turn a profit.
It is. We have a couple different ways that we resolve it. We're actually building a new restaurant right now, and it is rooted in the idea of not being wasteful. Like we're shooting for a degree of waste that is so minor that I don't know if we can even do it. But the way that we have historically dealt with this is that, for one, we purchase from farmers. We don't really buy from big companies. And that's good because we're getting stuff in a form that allows us to use 100% of it. And so, if we buy turnips, we don't just lop the little bottom part off of it. We use the tops as well. We do a lot of preserving, a lot of canning, a lot of fermentations, we do a lot of different things with the food. But the big one that allows us to combat it more than anything is that we're willing to print the menu as often as we need to print it. And we print it on a compostable paper. And so what we do is that if we only have 10 of something, when the 10th one runs out, rather than telling you we don't have it anymore, we just print a new menu. And then all those menus that we had, we shred them and put them in our compost. And so it's no big deal anyhow. And so we don't really throw stuff away. And so we're also willing to change a dish in the middle of dinner service if we need to, for the sake of not throwing things away. Unlike most restaurants where if we can't open with a certain amount of orders, it just gets relegated or tossed out or thrown in the garbage. Like, that's not how we work. And so we're never throwing stuff in the garbage short of actual garbage. And even that, I joke that my business partner has more like plastic buckets at his house than we call it Shaw Farms, and he basically has taken home every bucket that we've ever gotten with something in it, whether it be cooking oil or pickles or something, and he pots his plants in them. And so his whole yard is just full of 5-gallon buckets. And so it goes a really long way. We've really taken this to extremes. We use the cardboard that we do get. We use it we make our own fire starter for our wood burning grills and ovens. And so nothing really gets thrown away.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So all of that comes with work, right? And intention,
a lot
right?
Of work. Yeah.
There's an image of the head chef as a very colorful, demanding character, right?
Yeah.
But I think what you're describing is humility, right? To say that my first idea of this grand dish is going to have to change for the betterment of the world.
Yeah.
Is that your faith coming through of saying, hey, you got to do better than just the grand Michelin star?
Yes. I think what it is, and this is where the faith is represented in it, I have struggled to articulate this sometimes to my cooks. I've worked really hard to come up with a concise way of explaining the notion that you have to put yourself aside sometimes and make choices that are for the greater betterment of us all. And they don't understand how that has anything to do with picking what they want to cook that day. And I have tried my best to explain to them that sometimes something we want to make perhaps isn't an ethical choice. Perhaps it is questionable whether we should. Sometimes we may think to ourselves, man, this dish would be so much better if we used this ingredient in it. But that ingredient, maybe it's a fish that is overfished. Maybe it's a vegetable that is out of season. Perhaps it's a piece of meat that has too much waste on it, and we don't have a way to use that waste right now.
Sure.
And so we have to make the tough choice to just not do it.
Yeah.
And to me, I know that isn't as hard for me because it reflects my own faith in believing that we frequently have to choose the hard choice. We don't always get the benefit of the easy one. And in fact, a lot of the times, to me, I think that maybe the easy one is a plant. It's like it's put in front of us to test our faith, to see how willing we are to keep trying in the face of adversity. And I'm also reminded, and I tell them this every day, that we act like this is so hard and difficult for us, that we've had to make such sacrifices, but they pale in comparison to the sacrifices that have been made by others and that have been made on our behalf.
Sure.
I leave it usually at that because I know that I have people in my organization of many different faiths, and I don't want them to feel like if they are not Christian or Catholic that they don't have a voice in what we do. But I do try to stress to them that I believe that anything we do, any challenge that faces us pales in comparison to the most significant challenges that have been faced on our behalf.
Right. Yeah, that is a perfect segue to what I want to talk about next, which is the season of Lent, the season of giving up, of sacrifice, of fasting. For a chef, an interesting time, right? It's a time when most don't eat meat on Fridays.
Yeah.
What does the Lenten season look like for you?
I have changed it so many times.
Yeah.
But this is because I've realized that the food part of it is never all that hard for me, weirdly, believe it or not. So for years, I would go full vegetarian during Lent. And then I got really good at making vegetarian food. And it really wasn't that much of a challenge or a sacrifice. If anything, I feel like some of the food I made was more indulgent. So then, no meat on Fridays, fish. And then again, like in time, like my wife and I split our time between Atlanta and Maine. And when we're in Maine, we eat mostly fish anyhow.
Sure.
So, because that's what there is. And so again, that wasn't very hard. The one that I have done for the last few years that is almost impossible for me is sugar.
Okay.
I love sweets. I love them so much. And I will be the first to admit that I am not capable of doing it like every single day without fail.
Sure.
I was talking to Monsignor and I was discussing like, how do I know if I'm doing it right? And he's like, if it's really hard, you're doing it right. He's like, and it's not, hard for one person is different for somebody else. Like, and so again, he was like, you're right to change what you're doing, because once it stopped actually being in any way difficult or a sacrifice, that probably wasn't right. And so I was like, well, look, I do the no sugar thing, but I still let myself have like something sweet on Sundays. And he was like, yeah, that's fine. Like, you're fine. Like, don't sweat it. So that's where we are now. And to make it extra hard on myself, but as a reward, I have also ordered all of the Christmas treats that we will have on Christmas. I invited my mom to lunch today and made her lunch before I chatted with you guys. And I was walking her through and she's like, there's not that many of us. And I'm like, yes, I realize that I have basically ordered one cake per person, but I'm really excited about it. And I can't eat them until Christmas. So yeah, that's like, I get off the hook. I'm like, come on, baby. Like, so,
right. What does that give you? That sacrifice, whether it's at your restaurant making these choices or, in Lent with giving up sugar or so forth.
It weirdly gives me like clarity, I think is the way I would phrase it. Like it's, it is interesting how easy it is in our lives to become addicted to, accustomed to, take for granted things. I know how privileged I am. And so it is very easy for me to sometimes become desensitized to that degree of privilege. And
Right.
I know that giving up sugar is so petty in comparison to what other struggles are. Weirdly, though, because it is something that I love, and that maybe you could say I'm addicted to, not having it provides me the clarity to recognize just how privileged I am, and the fact that I get what I want all the time, and that really, that we don't need that in life. Like that is an exercise in excess, and one that is completely unnecessary. And it reminds me also of the fact that I am giving up something that is a luxury, while other people go without necessities. And I think it just changes my frame of reference.
Makes those Christmas treats taste a little sweeter too, right?
Yes, it does. Oh my, you have no, sometimes actually too much sometimes, I learned a long time ago that if you go 11 days without sugar, it basically resets your palate. And
really?
Stuff will taste so sweet that it's insane. So I learned that the hard way. So now I only order like European style desserts that are way less sweet than American desserts, because when you come back from that, you're not 20 something days ready. Of no sugar. You're not ready for that. Like a strawberry tastes like it's made out of maple syrup. So yeah, it's a little off the charts.
All right. I've got some more rapid fire questions for you here.
Let's do it.
If Jesus was a contestant on Top Chef, what would he bring to the judges' table?
I think he would bring humility to the judges' table. He would be honest and humble in what he was doing.
We know Jesus can turn water into wine, but is there a specific vintage that you would ask him to turn water into?
Yes. The best wine I have ever had in my entire life was a 1982 Chateau Palmer. I had one sip of that and went, okay, I get it. Yep, I get it.
If you had to feed the masses with only fishes and loaves, how would you prepare them?
One of the greatest things in the entire world is a fried fish sandwich. That's where it's at. So,
if Jesus had a restaurant, what would the specialty be?
Jesus strikes me as a guy who would be really rooted in the food of his like homeland. And so I think that he would be a guy who'd be like, this is from my hometown. Let me show you. He seems like an ingredient centric, seasonal kind of guy to me.
And then last question in this rapid fire round. What season of Top Chef would be Jesus's favorite?
Well, I mean, I think he would like season 6, my first one. I really do think that in reality, I am not a braggadocious person, but the last season of Top Chef I did, which was the All-Star season, when I literally got myself kicked off, when I demanded that I be kicked off the show, I can't stress to people enough how hard that was to do that, because I am a very competitive person.
Right.
The only way I was able to do that in that moment was that I really was like embracing and channeling my faith and believing that that was the right thing to do, because it was my mistake. No one else deserved to fall on the sword, as it were. I think proud is a generous term to believe, but I think he would have at least appreciated the fact that the struggle that it took to willingly sabotage your own chances of winning.
For sure. I'm sure Top Chef has brought many things into your life. What has been feedback from people who watch the show, who watch you? What has that been like?
It's been incredible. When I first did Top Chef, I didn't really know what I was getting into, to be honest with you. I did it largely out of desperation. I was in a restaurant that this was the economic downturn of 2008.
Right.
We needed business, and this seemed like an easy way to do that. I admittedly do not watch much reality television.
Sure.
And it's because I feel like I'm watching people in their worst moments, or I'm watching the validation of behavior that I don't believe we should validate. That said, what I have gotten from Top Chef and the feedback I have gotten that has meant the most to me are the people who tell me that they can tell that I am being very honest and real, and that I am unwilling to do the things that most people are in order to be famous or to win. And I tell them the same thing every time, which is I promised myself, I promised my mother and my spouse and my father, I prayed on this, and I promised that I would not let this change me, that I would not let the temptations break me from the person who I actually was. And the fact that that somehow comes through on television and resonates with people in their homes all across this country and in others, and that they take the time then to send me a an email or a text message or a direct message on social media or write me a handwritten letter, I cannot stress how much that means to me, because that's all I wanted. I never cared about winning that show. I cared about being given the opportunity to say what I thought was important to the largest audience I possibly could. I felt like this was my moment. And again, I believe firmly in the words that tell us that when our time, when we are given the ability to speak, if you are a speaker, speak, as it says, then that means it's your turn. Like you're supposed to say something meaningful. And that isn't to brag on yourself and defend your actions. It is to say something meaningful. And that's all I ever wanted it to be.
It's incredible. Well, and it shows off. I mean, you're a fan favorite and been welcomed back. And I mean, it's incredible. I just have to ask, like, being on a reality show, there has to be so many temptations to just go crazy on that, right? To backstab, to say whatever, like, right?
Yes. And let me say it like this.
Yeah.
It is encouraged. I'm not throwing anyone under the bus, but the conversation that floats around from everyone, including the people who are making the television show, is self-preservation. That's what you should do. I've never liked that part. They also really do their part to make sure that you are in a compromised position at all times. And so, we literally had to protest for years that we have more access to water on set because we only had alcohol. There was beer and wine, all of that you could ever want. But if you wanted a bottle of water, it was like moving heaven and earth. You get very little sleep. You don't eat regularly. And so you really are like a shell of yourself. And so the hardest thing in the world to do is fight back the temptation. And the temptation that you are constantly faced with is self-preservation. It is do whatever it takes to save yourself. And remember that these people are, quote, not your friends. And you sort of steal away your fellow competitors' humanity. And that is very much encouraged. And I have been told by producers of the show that I make boring television because I'm unwilling to do that, which is why you don't see me on a lot of other shows, unfortunately. I disagree, because everything I've ever been told was that you make very real television and we feel connected to you. But I guess to the people in LA, like my unwillingness to just like scam people over and a lot of other words I'm not going to use right now. I think that they prefer I have a different way of approaching it. So
funny. That's great.
They love the drama,
of course.
And people ask, like, are you told to say that? And I always tell people, if you hold someone's hand over a fire, you do not have to tell them to say ow. They will just do it. Like, same thing. Like if you put enough of the stimulus, they know the outcome. They don't have to tell you to do anything. They know what's going to happen. So
straight. I love the show.
I do too. And it has done amazing things for me, for my career, for me, even for me personally. In reality, I think I owe it a tremendous amount for the fact that I believe it gave me it helped me culinarily to redefine the way that I cook. I think it gave me additional confidence. I met my wife through it. Like, there are a lot of things like have come from this that are positive. So I would never say bad things about it, other than the fact that for people who are not particularly strong morally, you're going to see it, and you're going to see it quick, because your moral integrity is tested from the first minute you're there.
For sure. So switching gears a little bit more serious, harder topic. In 2018, you were diagnosed with a rare form of renal cancer that came as a surprise, as I understand it. I'm curious, when you received that diagnosis, thinking of your story of being a teen and being in that car accident, where did your mind go when you first learned of that?
Well, this is another one of those moments in life when I have a really hard time explaining something other than there being some degree of divine intervention. The reason I say that is that I went to the doctor because I was experiencing symptoms. I was feeling off. I was having pain in my kidney area. There a lot of things were happening. And so when I went to the doctor, they thought I had a kidney stone. They were sure that's what it was. And what they discovered was this massive tumor. The reason that I feel so strongly about the fact that this is some degree of divine intervention is that this is a form of cancer that's incredibly rare. It's a form of cancer that they don't even bother to start checking men for until they're in their 70s usually.
Wow.
And more importantly, it presents 0 symptoms.
Wow.
And they don't know why I felt it. They cannot explain to me how I could pinpoint it's my kidney. I am feeling something in my kidney. My doctors have told me 100 times, you just made like that's in your head. And I went,
sure.
Why would I have come here had it not like I came to you because I was hurting. I called you from another country to tell you this, and flew home from New Zealand to go to the doctor. Wow. So I was definitely presenting symptoms, and I've just been told over and over again, that's not possible. There are no symptoms. But here's the thing is that had I not felt the symptoms, what I was told by my doctors that day that they diagnosed it was that we had 10 days to do the surgery. Wow. Because it was at a state when their opinion was that within the next week, the tumor was going to rupture. And when it ruptured, the mortality rate was 90+%. Wow. And so in that moment, when I was told this is what it is, my wife was terrified.
Sure.
I was not. I wasn't scared at all because I felt very validated in the fact that you guys caught it, and you caught it because you were supposed to catch it. Like, I am here. We are having this conversation for a reason. And I felt shockingly clear-minded in that moment. I felt like I had some things that I needed to do. I needed to talk to my team. I wanted to make sure that everyone who was important to me in my life was told by me in the next 10 days what was going on and how important they were to me, because I did not know whether this would be successful. They were very clear that this was not a foregone conclusion, that this was going to go well.
Right.
And they had no way to biopsy anything because just touching it was enough to cause it to rupture.
Sure.
And so I felt very clear-minded. It was not until I was laying in the hospital, tubes attached, moments before the surgery began, that I got scared. But I was not fearful for losing my life. I was in fear of having perhaps not told everyone who I wanted to tell the significance that they had in my life. Sure. I felt like maybe I had forgotten some people. That's what scared me more than anything. Yeah. I knew that I was going to be okay, but I knew it was going to be a really difficult journey. I weirdly, and maybe this is like a weird Catholic guilt thing going on, but I felt like I hadn't been the best version of myself the last few years before this happened. I felt like my priorities had kind of gotten out of whack in life. I felt like I was chasing the money a little too much. I think getting sick was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because it was another one of these moments, like when I was 18, where the world had clouded my judgment and I needed clarity. And maybe I'm just too stubborn. And the only way for me to get clarity is to get like, a hard right hook in the face kind of thing. Sure. I think that God knows that his followers need varying degrees of certainty, and I'm reminded that there have been those who needed vengeance even to be able to see the truth. I'm not that far, but sometimes I do think I need like a swift kick in the ass, as my dad would say. And this was maybe something like that, because I feel that it reminded me again of what is actually important in life, what real crisis looks like. And I feel very thankful that it happened.
Yeah. And surgery went through. You came out?
Surgery was a mess. It went through. It didn't go smoothly. I nearly lost my life a couple times in the hospital. They brought me back 2 times. Wow. And I have no memory of this, by the way. I'm recanting the story my wife has told me.
Yeah.
I remember like laying on the bed in the room where they did the surgery, and it being it felt like it was like 15 degrees in the operating room. I remember being like, why is it so cold? And then I remember September. So from May to September is a gap of time where I have no memory, none whatsoever. And so I'm telling you what my wife told me, but I nearly died a couple times. I got a very bad infection following it. I had to have another surgery. I've had to have 9 total surgeries
Wow.
since that diagnosis. But we're 5 years past that now. And as of May of this year, I am officially cancer free, and there is no sign of any recurrence or going any sort of, everything appears to be in remission.
Yeah.
So
Congratulations.
thank you.
That is a hard fight for you and the people around you, for sure. As you said, it brought you a clarity. How do you look at God today, or at Jesus today, after an experience like this?
I have this relationship where I really, in a very literal way, see Jesus as a father, like as a very real father in my life. And as such, my relationship with him has changed as I have gotten older. When I was younger, I took him for granted. When I was a teenager, I don't think I liked him very much. I felt like he was maybe overbearing, asking too much of me. In my 20s, I loved him, but I was focused on something else. In my 30s, I began to recognize how he had been there all the time in a very steadfast way. And now in my 40s, I think I realized that there's a role that he played that he needs help with in our lives, which is he needs us. Once we have matured, he needs those of us who have reached that degree of maturity to help shepherd along younger people through those challenging times when it doesn't make sense. And so I feel very convicted with the relationship that I have, for example, with my goddaughter, in helping her. I don't want her to be perfect, and I don't want her to pretend like she has it all figured out. I just want to be able to be there to help when those questions that are hard to answer are in front of her. I don't want her to feel like she can't ask them. I felt like I couldn't ask them. And the way I feel about him now is a certain sort of longing admiration. I feel like I have something to contribute now. I feel like that I am finally at the point in my life where I can do his work that I think he knew I always could. I don't think I knew I always could. In fact, I think I believed for a long time that I couldn't. And I think that's where our relationship is today. And I look at someone like my mother, and she's graduated to a different level where she has a very real relationship in a way that I think takes a lifetime to build. And in the wake of losing my father, the relationship has evolved even more because I need him more. And I hear the words differently when they're spoken in Mass. I read them differently. I consider them differently. The brilliant part about it, and I was reading some writing by C.S. Lewis the other day, and someone who, I mean, I don't think it's arguable he's one of the smartest of us that has ever existed. And the way he articulated this notion of the fact that the words can have truth in them and so many different depths of meaning, they can have a surface value and yet have a much more significant value as you are able to understand it. That's the part that makes me know it's real. Like it to me, that can't be possible if it isn't real. Things in this world that are fake don't hold up to the eye test, to the every other test. This is one of those things where like you can measure it in every form short of maybe mathematics. And even then, I don't know, you might be able to. I think there's a reason why you can't prove everything mathematically. So, and this is coming from someone who believes firmly in science.
Sure.
My point is, I look forward to the evolution of my faith. And I think that I finally have realized maybe the greatest gift of it all, it isn't stagnant. It's that it does change and it evolves alongside you to provide you with what you need, but also to demand of you to provide back to it what you are capable of now that maybe you weren't in the past.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that with us. Your point about wanting to share and give back to people as they are coming up. I mean, that's very much what we're trying to do at Grotto, right? That's the whole basis of our mission from the university, is to try to ignite the spiritual life in young people who, as you say, have other things on their minds, have other focuses, attentions, trying to pay rent, trying to find their career, trying to find this person to love. If you could go back to yourself when you were just starting out in your 20s and so forth, knowing what you know now, what would you want to tell yourself?
There's a couple things, two things. The first is that I would actually tell myself that it is okay, maybe even expected. God knows that at some point you're going to get angry with him. I think it might be part of the journey. And that the thing is that if you'll just let it happen and work through it the way that you would be angry with a parent, but you work through it because you love them, that's a healthier way of doing it than to be angry with someone and not be willing to admit it and carry it for a long time. If you need to have it out with him, have it out with him so that you can move past it. And the second is that nowhere in this does it say anything about us being perfect or that that's expected of us or anything even close to that. This notion that that is the only way that you can possibly live in his image is a fallacy. Yeah. And too many young people believe that it's an all or nothing proposition. It is not in any way whatsoever. Give to it what you have to give. He knows. He already knows. He wants you to be the best version of you that you can be. He has not asked you to be more than that. He doesn't expect you to be more than that. He hopes that you will recognize your own potential and live up to it. He doesn't expect you to be perfect. And so you don't need to feel bad for the mistakes that you make. There is a difference between repenting your sins or feeling bad about committing a sin and tearing yourself up about it and not forgiving yourself for it.
Sure.
That relationship is one that if I could go back and tell my younger self those two things, I think I would have saved myself a lot of years of grief and anguish. I think I would have been able to graduate to a different place mentally faster if I had known that I wasn't disappointing him.
It's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. You've given a lot of your time and a lot of yourself here, and I'm deeply, deeply thankful for it all. I've got one final round of rapid fire for you.
Let's do it. I like the rapid fire.
Right. Okay. If Jesus were to come to your house for dinner, what would you cook for him?
Oh, that's a good one. Gosh, something that my granny made for me. It's called one dish hog dinner. It was a dish that she made one time to feed all of her siblings. There was very little food, and she concocted this sort of one pot dish out of a lot of scraps, and it not only fed the whole family, but it became a family favorite. To me, there is something about that it makes me think of so many of the parables that we read about in the Bible. It's not the same as taking a couple fish and feeding thousands. Somehow there's a tie to it, and I've always loved that about it. And so I'd probably make that for him.
I think you'd enjoy it. If you could ask Jesus one question, what would it be?
Oh gosh, hopefully I won't break down when talking about this. All the men in my family have served in the military. I'm the only male in my family who hasn't and who has not had to face combat. And I've always just wanted to know, why do we still have to do this? What's the point of it all? I feel very strongly about my family's connections to the military. I don't understand why we still have to go out and kill each other. I don't get it. And I don't know if it's for some reason that's bigger than I can understand, or if it's just the most base level animalistic thing, and we haven't learned how to be smarter than that. But I think about all the pain that they carried, and it bothers me, and I'd like to know why we have to do it.
If Jesus looked at you, how would you describe the look?
I'd like to think that he would look at me, perhaps not with the same adoration that like my dog Haggis does, who seems to think that I'm perfect, but maybe more like the way that my mom looks at me, where I know that she loves me, but I also know that she doesn't think that I'm perfect in any way either.
Where is Jesus most real for you?
I love the outdoors and nature. And when I need to reconnect, it's stillness and quiet that allows me to do it. And so I feel him most when I am standing on the cliff that overlooks the ocean at my house in Maine, and I'm just staring off into the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean. looking at that for some reason allows me to be able to feel him the most.
And then finally, if Jesus had a favorite podcast, what would it be?
Well, I mean, you would hope that you guys aren't false advertising here, that it is Jesus's favorite podcast. I also think Jesus would be a huge fan of Hardcore History.
I love that
with
show.
Dan Carlin.
Yeah,
I think he would appreciate the depth that man throws at even subjects that could be wrapped up in 30 minutes. He's like, 30 minutes? How about 11 hours? Like, so yeah, I feel like he would appreciate that.
Oh my gosh. Kevin, this has been fantastic. Thank you again.
Thank
we
you.
really appreciate it here.
Yeah.
Take care. You can learn more about Chef Kevin Gillespie on his Instagram at Chef Kevin Gillespie or his website, redbeardrestaurants.com.
This episode of Jesus' Favorite Podcast was hosted by Javi Zubizarreta and produced by me, Ebony Moxie. Senior producer, Josh Long. Grotto Network is Adrian Garaldi, Social Media Manager. Becky Rogers, Art Director. Kara Kenujeski, Project Manager. Ebony Moxie, Audio Storytelling Associate. Jackie Cho, Platform Storytelling Associate. Jane O'Connor, Associate Video Producer. Javi Zubizarreta, Director. Jesse McCartney, Senior Content Editor. Josh Long, Senior Video Producer. Kevin DeClute, Video Producer. Michaela Douglas, Digital Content Strategist. Mike Rossetti, Senior Manager for Community Engagement. Father Brendan McClare, Associate Producer. Ryan Brossard, Student Media Assistant. Special thanks to our guests at Notre Dame Studios. Did you like what you heard today? Please share Jesus' Favorite Podcast with a friend. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram at Grotto Network.
I love that show.
Nuance.
Whenever an episode drops, I'm like, all right, buckle in. You got 10 hours ahead of you.
Exactly. And my wife laughs at me because she's like, you've listened to that one before. And I'm like, yes, but it's 8 hours. And so it's like being like, you've taken that class before. Like, yeah, I still have to go back and reread it. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't absorb it all. I promise.